Growing up, Tim Burton movies were everything. They were wacky and fun, but dark, weird, and twisted. Most of them were kids' movies with a grown-up edge, with an art style unlike any other in Hollywood at the time. His films were instantly recognizable through their motifs and scores, more often than not by composer Danny Elfman, their sense of humor, their cast. Tim Burton was basically a Hammer horror director for the 80s onwards. Except he was working with big budgets, big franchises, big stars, and somehow he was even more out there. He was my favorite director growing up, and many of his movies are still some of my favorites ever. But what were his top 5 best movies?
Let's do this.
Number 5. Peewees Big Adventure. The number 5 spot was the toughest spot because I love so many of Tim Burton's movies. It was kind of hard not to include some of these movies in the top 5. But I just couldn't not have Pee-wee's Big Adventure in there. Obviously, your enjoyment of this movie will entirely depend on whether you like Paul Rubens' character Pee-wee or not. But this is Tim Burton's first feature film, and it was the first of his I saw. I loved it as a kid, and it contained everything I grew to absolutely love about his movies. It was hilarious, it looked bizarre, it was really creative, entertaining, and sometimes pretty dark. I couldn't even watch the Large Marge bit until years later. For a first feature, Pee-wee's Big Adventure is pretty epic despite its very simple premise. You follow Pee-wee Herman as he tries to hunt down his favorite bicycle, which was stolen from him by jealous neighbor Francis. He promptly sets off on a slightly misguided journey where he meets all sorts of strange characters, from angry bikers to criminals on the run, Godzilla, and this all ends up in Hollywood, where he has a kick-ass high-speed chase through the studios. Many films have tried to imitate the sheer joy, style, and hilarity of this movie, but they never quite got there. Maybe it's not for everyone, but Pee-wee's Big Adventure is still one of Tim Burton's purest movies. It's just a heck of a lot of fun, and it's well worth checking out. Number 4. Beetlejuice. It doesn't get much more Tim Burton than Beetlejuice. From the genius opening title sequence, you know you're in for one weird, wild ride. No Danny Elfman theme he's made since has been quite this instantly satisfying, and the rest of the score is brilliant too. The film follows a rather naive couple who moves into a new house only to have a tragic accident killing them both. They quickly return as ghosts but find that the afterlife is pretty complicated. They can't leave the house due to giant stripy sandworms. Time is altered, they discover a whole other world by literally drawing a door, and they struggle to haunt the new family that has moved into their house, which encourages them to seek some help from dodgy ghost Beetlejuice. Easily Michael Keaton's most fun performance ever. This is by far Tim Burton's funniest movie, and the cast, which includes Catherine O'Hara, Jeffrey Jones, and the underrated Glenn Shaddix, has a great time bringing their eccentric characters to life. Winona Ryder is of course terrific in a career-making role, and Gina Davis, with Alec Baldwin, provide a good wholesome contrast. This is, I would argue, Tim Burton's most creative film visually. The mix of stop motion and practical visual effects is impressive, not to mention the stunning art direction and production design, but also in terms of how surreal it is. And before you lose your mind later on, I'm not counting The Nightmare Before Christmas in any of this, okay, because he didn't direct it. With Beetlejuice, Tim Burton created something truly original, and it definitely holds up.
It's showtime.
Number 3, Batman and Batman Returns. Okay, so I cheated. I genuinely couldn't decide between Batman and Batman Returns. Two equally great films in my book, yet two very different approaches to the comic book adaptation. 1989's Batman was a groundbreaking box office mega hit that single-handedly redefined Batman as a character and comic book movies in general for decades to come. This was an appropriately dark, stylized film noir take on Batman, which until then was mostly known in TV and film as Adam West's Jolly Bright Knight. Tim Burton was handed a hefty budget, and he did not disappoint delivering a big scale, turning unlikely casting choice Michael Keaton into a believable Bruce Wayne and Batman, introducing a truly cruel, intimidating, yet funny Joker, in great part thanks to Jack Nicholson's portrayal, making Batman's gadgets, including the Batmobile, genuinely cool instead of just overly labeled jokes like in the 60s, hiring Danny Elfman to come up with what is still the best Batman theme by far, and delivering just the right amount of exciting action, impressive visuals, and romance. Batman Returns, meanwhile, was an even darker, much weirder film with more of a personal touch. This was Batman at its most, well, Tim Burton. Not so much going for a film noir vibe, rather a more German expressionist horror kind of thing. Danny DeVito was just brilliant as the nefarious and ghoulish Penguin, while Michelle Pfeiffer made the perfect Catwoman. Danny Elfman once again excelling in the score department and the film looking more gothic than ever, the scale feeling smaller for this one, admittedly, but that only helped give it an operatic feel as the heroes, anti-heroes, and villains battle it out for the soul of Gotham City. Two great movies whose impact on the comic book movie genre is still felt to this day.
Meow.
Number 2. Ed Wood. The most grounded of the films on this list, Ed Wood managed to be both a biopic based on a true story and real people while still feeling like a Tim Burton fantasy of sorts. You can tell that the director's heart was very much in this one, as even though the film does make fun of B to Z movie director Edward D. Wood Jr., his bizarre friends and trashy movies quite a bit, you can tell that Burton has a genuine fondness and even admiration for the man who was often called the worst film director of all time. Johnny Depp, whilst not looking much like the man himself, perfectly captures the blind excitement, creative drive, and madness that goes into becoming a filmmaker. Ed Wood is a silly character and his movies weren't that good, but in Tim Burton's eyes, the embodiment of what making movies is all about. The film is about Ed Wood, but it's really about filmmaking, how it takes a lot of sweat, tears, imagination, management, and convincing to even make something as goofy and seemingly low effort as Plan 9 from Outer Space. I hate biopics, but I like Ed Wood because it's not just a biopic, it's a celebration of cinema itself. In Ed Wood's eyes, you can see desperation and excitement in equal parts, which might just be the exact fuel a young filmmaker often needs. The late Martin Landau, of course, earned himself an Oscar for his excellent performance as Dracula actor Bela Lugosi, and he is the broken heart of this film, a tragic yet genial and powerful presence, sometimes hilarious, sometimes tragically sad, always great, yet near the end of a troubled path. He is indeed the heart of this film, and his relationship with Ed Wood is a genuinely sweet one. With Ed Wood, Tim Burton delivered one of the best biopics of all time, and it deserved all the praise that it received.
Pull the string!
And number 1, Edward Scissorhands. Come on, admit it, you knew this was coming. The quintessential Tim Burton film. Edward Scissorhands was completely different to all the films he'd made prior. This wasn't a big, flashy adventure. This was in fact a little fairy tale set in suburbia about a character who was born different and who somehow finds himself having to come face to face with the real world, with mixed results to say the least. This is Tim Burton's sweetest and most heartfelt film. Through the vulnerable and naive character of Edward, a career-defining role for Johnny Depp, we see the best and the worst in people. Through Edward, we encounter kindness and love, but also cruelty and bigotry. Having one of Tim Burton's idols in there, Vincent Price, being the creator of Edward, feels like Burton's way of saying thank you to a man who inspired him in his youth. It's almost like Edward is Burton himself, a younger and infinitely more confused Burton, mind you. There's an element of poetry that shines in Edward Scissorhands. This is very much a modern-day fable, and it almost rhymes in the way it tells its story. It's a terrific, heartbreaking coming-of-age story, and the cast, which includes Winona Ryder again, Diane Wiest, and Alan Arkin, bring an essential realness to their roles, which helps ground the film and make it relatable. Danny Elfman provides what is probably his most beautiful score to date, and it's still tough to find a Christmas movie quite as genuinely good as this one. Tim Burton's sweetest movie is also its best in my book, and that's why it is my number 1.
Goodbye.
Thank you for watching this video. Do you agree with this list or disagree? Is there another director you want me to look at? Let me know in the comments. And please like and subscribe to help this channel grow if you can. I would very much appreciate it. And also do check out my Patreon if you have the time. Take care everyone. Thanks again.